The situation surrounding Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has reached a fever pitch in recent days, with conflicting reports, intelligence assessments, and diplomatic signals converging into one of the most closely watched geopolitical stories of the year. Iranian state media and senior officials within the Islamic Republic have gone to unusual lengths to push back against widespread speculation that has circulated in foreign intelligence circles, among Iranian exile communities, and across social media platforms, that Khamenei is either gravely ill, incapacitated, or no longer among the living. What has unfolded over the past several days is a carefully orchestrated, multi-layered campaign by Tehran to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the 85-year-old supreme leader remains not just alive, but in command. The backdrop to all of this is critical. For weeks, Khamenei had maintained an unusually low public profile. Scheduled appearances were canceled or quietly removed from official calendars. State television, which typically broadcasts the Supreme Leader's addresses with considerable fanfare, went stretches of time without airing fresh footage. Foreign analysts, particularly those monitoring the Islamic Republic through open-source intelligence frameworks, began flagging the silence. Former officials within Western intelligence agencies made rounds on news programs suggesting that something was wrong. The murmurs grew louder. Iranian opposition figures in exile, many of them based in Europe and North America, amplified the speculation with their own sourcing, claiming that Khamenei had suffered a serious medical episode and that a succession struggle had quietly begun behind closed doors in Tehran. Tehran's response was not immediate, and that delay itself fed the narrative. When the Iranian government finally moved, it did so in a way that was clearly designed to answer not just the immediate questions about Khamenei's health, but the broader strategic question of whether the Islamic Republic was entering a period of internal instability at a moment when it can least afford it. The first signal came through official channels. Iranian state television aired footage of Khamenei meeting with senior military commanders in what appeared to be a working session inside his official compound. The footage was notable for several reasons. Khamenei appeared seated but alert, engaging directly with the officers present, and in at least one segment of the broadcast, he could be seen speaking at length, gesturing with his hands, and reviewing what appeared to be documents on a table in front of him. Iranian state media moved quickly to contextualize the footage, with anchors and commentators emphasizing the Supreme Leader's sharpness and his continued personal involvement in matters of national defense and strategic policy. The broadcast was aired repeatedly throughout the day, a deliberate choice by Iranian media managers who understood that a single airing would not be sufficient to neutralize the volume of speculation that had built up. But the footage alone was not going to be enough, and Iranian officials clearly understood this. The second element of the campaign was a coordinated wave of public statements from senior figures within the Iranian political and military establishment, each one carefully calibrated to convey not just that Khamenei was alive, but that he remained actively engaged with governance at the highest level. The Chief of Staff of Iran's armed forces made a point of publicly referencing instructions he had recently received from the Supreme Leader. The head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a statement describing a recent conversation with Khamenei in terms that made clear a living, functioning relationship between the IRGC leadership and the office of the Supreme Leader. These statements were not accidental. They were coordinated talking points, distributed through official channels at a pace and with a consistency that signaled a deliberate communications strategy. The third, and perhaps most significant element, came in the form of a live audio address. Iranian state media carried what it described as a real-time message from Khamenei to a gathering of religious scholars and clerics. The address was notable for its content as well as its format. Khamenei spoke on topics that were immediately relevant to the current geopolitical moment, including Iran's nuclear posture, the state of negotiations with Western powers, and the role of the Islamic Republic in what he described as a shifting global order. The level of specificity in the address, with direct references to recent events and current policy debates, was presented by Iranian officials as evidence that the Supreme Leader was not simply reading from a prepared text drafted by subordinates, but was personally engaged with the substance of Iran's strategic situation. Western analysts were divided on how to interpret all of this. Some took the position that the very intensity of Tehran's effort to prove Khamenei was alive was itself suspicious, that a government confident in the health and stability of its leader would not feel the need to mount such an elaborate public relations campaign. Others pushed back on this reading, arguing that Iran's communication strategy in this instance was a rational response to a genuine information crisis driven by external speculation, and that the appropriate analytical move was to take the evidence at face value rather than to treat its existence as evidence of deception. Within Washington, the response was cautious but attentive. The State Department asked directly about the Iranian footage and whether the United States government had any information that contradicted Tehran's claims about Khamenei's condition, declined to offer a definitive assessment. A spokesperson said that the United States was monitoring the situation and that it would not be appropriate to comment on intelligence matters. This was a carefully worded non-answer, and experienced observers of American diplomatic communication understood it as such. The refusal to affirmatively validate Iran's claims, combined with the refusal to contradict them, suggested that American intelligence analysts were not fully persuaded by what Tehran had put forward, but were also not in a position to assert with confidence that Khamenei was anything other than what Iranian officials were claiming. The Israeli government, which has historically been among the most aggressive in its intelligence operations targeting Iran, was similarly circumspect in its public posture. Israeli officials who spoke to media did so without attribution, and their comments were framed in hedged conditional language. One official described the Iranian footage as consistent with Khamenei being alive, while stopping well short of confirming that assessment with any degree of certainty. Another suggested that Israel was satisfied with its own intelligence picture of the situation inside Iran, but offered no details. The Mossad, which has penetrated Iranian institutions at multiple levels over the years, was not providing public commentary, and the silence of Israel's most capable intelligence agency on this question was itself a data point that analysts were trying to read in multiple directions. What makes this moment particularly significant is the broader context in which it is unfolding. Iran is navigating one of the most complex strategic environments it has faced in decades. The country is engaged in sensitive, high-stakes negotiations over its nuclear program, negotiations in which the identity and disposition of the supreme leader is not merely a symbolic question, but a substantive one. Khamenei is not a figurehead in the Iranian system. He is, constitutionally and practically, the final authority on all matters of national security and foreign policy. Any ambiguity about whether he is alive and functioning is an ambiguity about whether Iran's negotiating positions are durable, whether agreements reached with Iranian representatives can be considered binding, and whether the political dynamics inside the Islamic Republic are stable enough to support the kind of sustained diplomatic engagement that a nuclear deal would require. This is precisely why the speculation about Khamenei's health has been so damaging to Iranian interests, and why Tehran felt compelled to respond as aggressively as it did. The Islamic Republic's negotiators cannot effectively represent a system whose head is in question, and the Supreme Leader's office cannot project the kind of authority that Iranian foreign policy depends on if foreign governments and intelligence agencies are openly debating whether that office is occupied by a man capable of exercising authority. There is also a domestic dimension that should not be overlooked. Inside Iran, the question of succession is one of the most politically sensitive topics imaginable. The system of velayat-e-faqih, the guardianship of the jurist upon which the Islamic Republic is built, vests extraordinary power in the person of the supreme leader. A transition between supreme leaders is not merely an administrative event. It is a potentially transformative political moment that could shift power dynamics among the various factions and institutions of the Islamic Republic in ways that are difficult to predict. The clerical establishment, the IRGC, the Basij, the reformists who remain within the system, the hardliners who dominate it. All of these actors have their own interests and their own preferences when it comes to the question of succession. Any public uncertainty about Khamenei's condition risks activating those interests prematurely, potentially triggering a political dynamic that the Islamic Republic's leadership is not prepared to manage. This is why the communications campaign around Khamenei's health was directed not just at foreign audiences but at domestic ones as well. The repeated broadcasting of footage on state television, the coordinated statements from senior officials, the live address to religious scholars, all of these were calibrated to reassure Iranians, and particularly the politically significant constituencies within the Iranian establishment, that the system was stable, that the supreme leader was at his post, and that no one should be making premature calculations about what might come next. Whether this effort succeeded is a different question from whether it was attempted. The evidence that it was attempted is clear. The evidence that it succeeded is more contested. Among Iranian exile communities, the response to Tehran's campaign was largely skeptical. Journalists and analysts affiliated with Persian-language media operating outside Iran were quick to raise questions about the footage, questions about when exactly it was filmed, whether it had been edited, and whether the setting was consistent with what we know about Khamenei's usual operational environment. Some pointed to details in the broadcast that they found inconsistent. Others made note of the careful avoidance of certain kinds of evidence that would be harder to fake or stage, such as a press conference at which Khamenei appeared in person before a room of journalists, took questions, and responded in real time. The absence of that kind of interaction, in a moment when it would have been the single most effective way to silence speculation, was treated by skeptics as significant. Defenders of the Iranian government's position responded that expecting Khamenei to submit to a Western-style press conference was an unrealistic standard, one that reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of how the Supreme Leader's office operates. Khamenei has never held press conferences. He does not engage directly with the foreign press. The manner in which he communicates, through addresses to select audiences, through official broadcasts, through statements relayed by senior officials, is entirely consistent with how he has always operated. The absence of a press conference proves nothing, according to this view, because a press conference was never going to happen regardless of Khamenei's health. This is a legitimate point, and it illustrates the broader epistemological challenge that faces anyone trying to assess the situation from the outside. The Islamic Republic is, by design, an opaque system. Access is tightly controlled. Information flows are managed by state institutions. Independent verification of claims made by the government is structurally difficult, not because something is being hidden in this particular instance, but because the system was built in a way that makes independent verification difficult in general. This means that the normal tools of journalistic and analytical verification are not easily applied to questions about what is happening inside the Iranian leadership. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, human sources inside Iranian institutions, these are the tools that intelligence agencies bring to bear on questions like this one. And it is notable that none of the Western governments that have the most sophisticated intelligence capabilities trained on Iran have publicly said that they believe Khamenei is dead or incapacitated. The absence of a definitive contradiction from Washington, London, Tel Aviv, or Riyadh is not proof that Khamenei is alive and well, but it is a data point. Governments that had high-confidence intelligence suggesting the opposite of what Tehran is claiming would face significant pressure to use that information, both to shape the diplomatic landscape and to manage public expectations in their own countries. The United States, in particular, would have strong incentives to be forthcoming if it had evidence that Khamenei was no longer in control of the Iranian state. American policy toward Iran, the nuclear negotiations, the broader strategic competition in the Middle East, all of these would need to be recalibrated in real time if the supreme leader were genuinely incapacitated or dead. The fact that no such recalibration has been publicly signaled and that American officials continue to speak about Iran in terms that presuppose a functioning leadership is at least consistent with the view that the United States, whatever its doubts, does not currently have high-confidence evidence that Tehran's claims are false. The medical dimension of this story is also worth examining carefully. Khamenei is 85 years old. He is known to have battled prostate cancer, a fact that was never officially confirmed by Iranian authorities but has been widely reported based on multiple independent sources over many years. His physical stamina and his capacity for the kind of intensive work schedule that the Supreme Leader's office demands have been questions for well over a decade. The speculation about his health did not emerge from nowhere. It has deep roots in legitimate reporting about a man who has been in declining physical condition for years, even as he has continued to exercise power. The question, therefore, is not whether Khamenei has health problems. That much appears well established. The question is whether his current condition has crossed some threshold, a threshold of incapacity or of death, that would change the fundamental political equation inside Iran, and that question, based on everything that is currently available publicly, remains genuinely open. What we can say with reasonable confidence is this: Iran mounted a significant, coordinated, multi-platform effort to demonstrate that Khamenei is alive and in command. That effort included visual evidence, audio evidence, and the coordinated testimony of senior officials across the military and political establishment. No Western government with significant intelligence capabilities has publicly contradicted the Iranian position. The speculation that drove Iran's response originated primarily in exile media and open-source analysis, not in official assessments from major intelligence agencies, and the broader geopolitical context, the nuclear negotiations, the regional strategic competition, the domestic political sensitivity around succession, gives both sides in this information contest powerful incentives to manage the narrative in their own favor. For Tehran, the incentive is to project stability and authority. For critics of the Iranian government, the incentive is to undermine the Islamic Republic's legitimacy and to keep questions about its future alive in the minds of Western policymakers and the Iranian public. Both of these incentive structures need to be kept in view when assessing the claims and counterclaims that are circulating. The footage that Iranian state media broadcast has not been definitively debunked. The statements from senior officials have not been shown to be fabricated. The audio address attributed to Khamenei has not been conclusively proven to be a fabrication or a recording from an earlier date. At the same time, none of this evidence has been independently verified in a way that should lead to complete confidence in Tehran's narrative. The Islamic Republic's media environment is not one in which independent verification is easy or even possible through normal journalistic means. What this situation illustrates, perhaps above all else, is the degree to which questions about leadership, health, and succession in closed authoritarian systems create genuine uncertainty. Uncertainty that has real strategic consequences. When the leader of a nuclear threshold state, a state engaged in active negotiations with global powers, a state whose military capabilities and regional influence are significant by any measure, when the health and capacity of that leader becomes genuinely unclear, the ripple effects are felt across the entire strategic landscape. Diplomatic processes stall or accelerate based on assessments of whether a current leadership is durable. Military planners adjust their assumptions. Political actors inside the country in question make calculations about their own futures. Allies and adversaries alike try to position themselves for multiple contingencies. The information environment becomes contaminated with speculation, disinformation, and motivated reasoning from multiple directions. Iran's decision to mount such an aggressive public campaign to demonstrate Khamenei's vitality is, in this context, entirely understandable as a strategic decision. Whether it will prove sufficient to stabilize the information environment and restore confidence in the Islamic Republic's internal coherence is a different question entirely. The history of closed systems dealing with leadership health crises suggests that once the speculation begins, it is very difficult to fully extinguish. The Soviet Union dealt with this dynamic repeatedly in its final decades. North Korea has dealt with versions of it multiple times. The questions once raised tend to persist. What the Soviet comparison reveals most starkly is the danger that managed opacity poses to the system itself over the long term. When Leonid Brezhnev's decline became visible to the Soviet public in his final years, and when Yuri Andropov and Konstantin Chernenko each died in quick succession after very brief tenures as General Secretary, the effect on public confidence in the Soviet system was corrosive in ways that the Politburo never fully anticipated or managed. The Islamic Republic has studied that history. Its leadership is aware of the risks that visible leadership decline poses not just to the individual in question, but to the legitimacy of the entire political structure. That awareness is part of what is driving the current communications effort, not just the need to answer immediate questions about Khamenei's health, but the deeper institutional imperative to prevent the kind of sustained credibility erosion that destroyed the Soviet Union's capacity to hold the loyalty of its own population. The North Korean parallel is instructive in a different way. When Kim Jong-un disappeared from public view for extended periods, most notably in 2014, when he was absent for over a month and speculation about his health and political status became intense, Pyongyang's eventual response combined controlled reappearance footage with a coordinated wave of official reassurances that bore a structural resemblance to what Tehran is doing now. The North Korean regime survived those episodes intact, largely because its system of total information control made it impossible for challengers to organize around the uncertainty. Iran's information environment, while tightly managed, is not as hermetically sealed as North Korea's. Satellite television, VPNs, and a large and politically engaged diaspora mean that Iranians have access to alternative narratives in ways that North Koreans simply do not. This makes Tehran's task harder and the stakes of its communications campaign higher. The role of Iran's diaspora in shaping this story deserves particular attention. The Iranian exile community, scattered across the United States, Europe, and the Persian Gulf, is not a monolithic political force, but it is a remarkably active one in the information space. Persian-language satellite channels broadcasting from Los Angeles, London, and Dubai have audiences inside Iran that, while impossible to precisely quantify, are understood by Iranian authorities to be substantial. These channels have been at the forefront of amplifying and analyzing the speculation about Khamenei's health, and their coverage has been sophisticated enough to force Iranian state media into a reactive posture. The Islamic Republic has long treated these exile media outlets as instruments of foreign-backed regime change, and in the current moment, that framing serves Tehran's purposes by allowing it to characterize the speculation about Khamenei's health as part of a coordinated foreign information operation rather than as a legitimate journalistic inquiry. Whether that characterization is accurate is a separate question from whether it is strategically useful, and for Tehran's purposes, its strategic utility is currently very high. For now, the official position of the Islamic Republic is that Ali Khamenei is alive, is in command, and is actively directing the affairs of the Iranian state at one of the most consequential moments in its history. The international community is watching carefully, processing the available evidence, and making its own calculations. Those calculations will shape not just how the world relates to Iran in the coming weeks, but potentially how the most consequential questions about Iran's nuclear future, its regional role, and its internal political trajectory are ultimately resolved. The story is far from over. In a situation this opaque, with stakes this high, and with this many actors with this many competing interests, the next development could come from any direction. A new broadcast, a credible leak, a shift in the diplomatic posture of a major power, a statement from within Iran that opens a new window into what is actually happening. Any of these could change the picture significantly. What is clear is that the question of Khamenei's health and capacity has moved from the margins of geopolitical discourse to its very center, and it is going to stay there until the uncertainty is resolved in a way that the key actors in this drama find credible. Until that happens, every signal from Tehran will be scrutinized with an intensity that the Islamic Republic's leadership almost certainly finds uncomfortable, and every silence will be interpreted in light of the questions that Iran's own communications campaign has so far failed to fully answer.